Okay, so noticing the time, I want to go ahead and get us started so we can have plenty of time with our speaker today. And so hello everybody, so happy that you could be joining us today. And to begin, I'm going to introduce our speaker. So Dr. Marcella LaFever, or the author before us today, Cella Anne, currently lives in Golden, British Columbia. For those of you that do not know the area, this is in southern Canada between Vancouver and Calgary, situated in dense mountainous region, home to multiple national parks. I had fun looking it up on Google Maps. So she received her BA in sociology from San Francisco State University, her MA in communication studies from California State University, and her PhD from our very own department here at the University of New Mexico in 2005. Actually took her 3 very quick years to get it done, right? Yeah. I couldn't believe that. I was like, wow. The title of her dissertation was Relational Dimensions of Intercultural Communication for Public Dialogue and Decision Making, a case study of modern day treaty negotiation in British Columbia. Is that correct?
Was it that long? Was it really that long?
Which was inspired by the years of community development consulting she'd done prior to returning to graduate school. Throughout her career, she has taken a particular interest in optimizing the advantages of cultural diversity during small group decision making and all things regarding indigeneity. She grew up as a military child and has lived in 3 countries: the UK. Were you born there? Born in the UK, in England. The US and Canada. Her work has appeared in the Journal of International and Intercultural Communication, Intercultural Education, Signs of Water, and in Communication Pedagogy edited collections. Last year, she was awarded Professor Emeritus at the University of Fraser Valley. Congratulations. And the vast experiences she has had, combined with the wealth of information she has unearthed by tracing back through her ancestors, are detailed in the autobiography and historical narrative she is here to share with us today, 404 years. So please help me in giving a warm welcome and congratulatory applause for Cella Anne.
Now I know what I don't have to talk about. Thank you. First, I want to say that I'm really happy to be back in Tiwa territory. I lived for quite a few years as a young child in the Mojave Desert, and so any place in the Southwest where you get those really beautiful morning temperatures and evening temperatures, I love it. But before I really begin, I have a presentation to make to David Weiss, who David and Chris were both in my cohort, PhD cohort, and David wrote one of my reviews for the book, and this is my first opportunity I've had to present him with this book.
Thank you.
So thank you so much, David.
Thank you, Pastor.
And especially I was happy that he was willing to do it with his far back marketing expertise, so it was just such a pleasure to read the review when it came, so it made the book cover. So I'm going to start with just a little bit of background. The basic intent of my book is this: moving from social injustice towards social justice in the long term and also in my own life, that journey. Which was not just a smooth journey. Right? And so just to mention this, that yes, my legal name, my birth name, which is the copyright of the book, is Marcella Anne LaFever, but my family always called me Cella, or Cella Anne. And when I was deciding on how to do the nom de plume for the book, I decided if I used LaFever, it only was one portion of the family that I'm talking about. So I thought, and Cella Anne just looks better on the cover, right? Nice and short and sweet. So that's why the difference in those 2 names. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about background, including, Michelle mentioned San Francisco State, Cal State Sacramento, and then UNM. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, but there's some important parts of that process that impact on how I wrote this book. And along the way, I'm going to give 4 tips that I learned in that progress that I thought I might as well pass on these tips for graduate work while I'm at it, because they were, all 4 tips were very, very helpful to me in that journey. So I'll pass those on. They are not part of the book. Some of the stories are around those, one tip in particular, but there's 4 here, so you can watch for them or listen for them. So golden, that was a pretty good description. Only one thing, Vancouver's here, Calgary's here, and Golden's here. So it's the closest big city. You do have to go over a provincial line to get there, but yeah, Vancouver itself is like 8 hours drive, and Calgary's 3. So just to orient you a bit more about that. But it is at the crossroads of Ktunaxa and Secwépemc territory. I put this because one of the things that I chose to do in this book is every scene, every scenario that I put the year, the indigenous territory in which it takes place, and then the modern name or the name that it was called at that time. When states didn't have names yet, those kind of things. So, the reason it's the crossroads is because Golden itself is a pretty harsh climate between 2 really sensitive mountain passes that often avalanche. People get stuck there quite often. And so there was never a settlement in Golden itself, but it was a hunting territory. And about just over 150 to 200 years ago, the Secwépemc people, one family moved over the mountains into the area and discovered that Golden, it's what's called Golden now, at that time it's called Beavermouth, too many mosquitoes. So they moved further south where there's less mosquitoes. So further into what was Ktunaxa territory, and so that's why I call it the crossroads. What else did I want to say about that? I want to read you a little piece just from the first year. So I originally got there hitchhiking across Canada with a friend in 1975, and then I moved back for 9 months in 1976, and this little piece is from that time. It's just part of a chapter. So this is 1976, Ktunaxa Secwépemc territory, Golden, BC, Canada. And I lived with a family of cowboys when I first moved there. They actually were what's called, they did guiding and outfitting. They took hunters, although by the time I got there, the boys didn't really want to take hunters anymore, so they would take photographers into the outback and look for grizzly bears and things like that. So this is just one scene that happened that year while I was there. The horses were famous for breaking fences and grazing all over the neighborhood. Occasionally, they would listen when the boys called them home for feeding time, but when the old man, Wild Bill, as he was lovingly called, whistled, they were back as fast as they could get there. He was the only one who would regularly give them oats, and they would grovel for oats. I remember one evening when there was a mist lying over the backfield and the horses were way down by the river, but at least they were on the home side of the fence. It was just about feeding time, and a whole crew of us were just lounging in the yard, enjoying the end of the day and listening to the strumming of a single guitar. Somebody decided to shout the horses in, and I will never forget that incredible sight. They came at a gallop, single file around the back row of trees, and as they cut into the open field, they spread out side by side to see who could get home first. Sorrel, white, dapple, gray, and every combination of every horse hue spanned our vision. Galloping with their breath steaming, joining the mist on the field, their sides heaving as they reached the fence, they started milling frantically, looking for the hay and oats, snorting and stamping. The guitar player whistled, shouted, "Listen up," and began to the eagles. "You get the best of my love." Every animal fell silent, twitched their ears forward, and stood at attention while the guitar played. And the words rang out on the first couple of lines. I can think of no more surreal and magical scene that I have experienced in my entire life. So just one little tiny piece of my experience when I first lived there. So that was the year that I fell in love with it there. So in 1995, I was doing a small group facilitation, like Michelle mentioned, and I was asked to do one for this thing that was called the forest renewal, so for a forestry session, which was specifically supposed to include First Nations people, because by then there had been a couple of really huge court cases in the Canadian courts and decisions made. I don't know how much of any of you might know about the history of First Nations in Canada, but in British Columbia there were never any, shouldn't say never, almost never, any treaties made, even though they were supposed to, like Queen Victoria told Canada, you have to treaty. But in British Columbia, they just kind of, what's now British Columbia, they just kind of ignored that. But so there were these huge court cases that said, no, you must treaty, so you have to treaty now. You didn't do it before, you have to do it now. So this was sort of during that period of time, and one of the biggest topics was consultation with First Nations, because Queen Victoria had said, it is their land. If you're going to do anything with their land, you need to consult. So cutting down trees, blocking up streams, anything like that, right? It was a little bit too late by then to completely overcome that, but that was the intent that they communicated. So I went to this consultation and was supposed to lead small group discussions. And at the welcome, I thought, oh, this is good. Chief Sophie Pierre was giving the welcome to this. I'm like, oh, maybe it's working. People are being consulted with. But it turned out that she said, I'm here to give you a welcome, but none of our people are going to be here because nobody asked us about the date that you decided to do this. We actually have a treaty negotiation this weekend, and we're not going to be here. So that was in 1995, and Chief Sophie Pierre has had a long, distinguished career. And when I was looking up for a recent photograph of her, this article came up that I knew nothing about, and this is from just May this year, that she was appointed as, I think I wrote it down here to get it exactly right, inaugural senior fellow in Indigenous Governance and Development at Harvard Kennedy School, Ash Center. So that's a pretty huge thing. I had no idea. But it was from that time and thinking about what she said that my research question started. I wasn't thinking about going back to graduate school at that point, but that question sat there. And this is tip number one, that your research question must burn in the pit of your stomach because it has to last a long time. I still work on the same question, which is what went wrong, basically. How did the communication, miscommunication, non-communication, whatever it was it purposeful? Was it just not thinking about it? What was it? and what would overcome that, especially in these kind of situations where you have a really negative historical situation where Indigenous peoples have been beat down, never treated with, ignored, put in residential schools, all of those things. And so that question is still one that I work on, and it's still one that informs this book in some way. This book's not meant to answer that question, but the question is still there. It's not solved yet, right? So that question started at that point. So Sacramento, I worked on, I'm not going to talk about Sacramento, except that it was a transition between, I had been out of university for 22 years when I decided to go back for a master's. I'm only going to go for a master's. That was it, just, upgrade my skills, get a better job kind of thing. And when I got to Sacramento, I knew that was where I was supposed to be doing that. But because I'd been out for 22 years, I had to take 2 fourth-year senior courses to prove that I could do it, right? One of those I took was statistics, which you wouldn't think would be a choice, but I'd actually done a sociology degree, so I figured I must remember something from statistics, and I was okay. I mean, I didn't get an A in the class, but I did all right. The other one was in rhetoric, which I had never had any experience in that. And there was one night, I only missed class once in the whole time that I was at Sacramento, but my son, who was about 10 at the time, my youngest son, I had to go to a PTA meeting and that semester, and so I was gone that one class session. And as I was waiting outside the classroom for the next class session, one of the other students who was in the same position of I, she had to take she'd been in the Army and she needed to take some prerequisite courses. She came up to me and she said, "Marcella, I have to apologize to you." And I'm like, "What for?" And she said, "Because we talked about you in class last week when you were not there." And I'm like, "Oh?" And she said that the students, the fourth year students, I'm not sure if she specified, she said students were complaining that I always had something to say, that I always had a response to the things that the instructor threw out there. And I was like, oh my God, I don't want to do that to the other students. I don't want to be that student who takes over the class or whatever. So she said, "Don't worry. Dr. Stunner said you all need to be more like her." So I'm like, okay, I feel a bit better. But I went and asked another friend that I really trusted and said, "What do I do? Like, what can I do differently?" And this person, this is tip number 2, said, "Never hide the brilliance of your light." So don't, you can think about how do I respond, how do I help other students to respond to that, but don't suppress what you know that you need to say on something. So that's tip number 2. And that same professor later on in the class, he had us do an exercise where we had to defend our definition, or example of a definition of a word in rhetoric. And he grilled me like you wouldn't believe it. I realized after that he was demonstrating for the class what it was like to actually defend a position like that. So it served me well when it came to not so much defense of my thesis, but definitely to defense of my dissertation at UNM. The other, let's see, where am I? UNM, being at UNM was actually the place that really opened my heart to immersing myself in the beauty of cultural diversity. I already cared about cultural diversity, but really getting immersed, and New Mexico has 23 sovereign First Nations, Native American communities. I don't know, how do you refer to that here? I forget. But anyway, First Nations is the sort of general term in Canada. And just think, because I realized that I still thought about Indigenous peoples as sort of one thing, right? One whole, same culture, that kind of thing. And I realized that I really realized that that's not in any way true. So that being here in New Mexico was really important in that realization. And also learning about colonization through acts such as those wrought by Onyate. I knew nothing about Onyate. All of you, Onyate? Okay. No? All right. Next assignment. Very important, really awful part of New Mexico history with Pueblo people. I had done, I will read a piece, did I want to do it here? I don't think so, but I will read a piece that I knew about those, terrible acts of colonization from a younger age, but I knew nothing about Onyate and nothing as horrible as what Onyate did. So that was reinforced for me. I will read that piece. This is 1968, Ohlone Territory, Santa Clara Valley, California. I'm not going to read the whole section. The first part of it is about we had just moved there. We're a military family, so we moved around a lot, didn't really have much for friend groups. And this girl that was in my class, we were both in band together. So because we ended up having a lot of classes together because it probably got, our schedules got formulated around being in band. She was blind, she is blind. And I learned all kinds of stuff from her, really cool stuff. So the first part's about that, I'm not gonna read it. But when we went into high school, our band instructor was really authoritarian and it wasn't fun anymore. We did have marching band, so that part was okay for me because I got to go to football games and stuff, which I probably wouldn't have been able to otherwise. So I liked the marching band part of it, but otherwise, no. So this story is about that. In 10th grade, our instructor instituted a new rule that if you left your music out after class instead of putting it in your cubby, you would be fined 50 cents. In 1971, that was still a fair amount. One of the other flautists that I often walked to school with forgot her music one day and asked if she could borrow mine because she had tutoring after school. I acceded but reminded her to put it away at the end. She did not, and I heard about it from the instructor as soon as I got to class the following day. I argued against it, but that was a useless battle. My arguing just made him angry, and he told me not to come to class until I brought in the 50 cents. I went off to rustle up the money somewhere, but decided I was going to bring it all in pennies. Tell on myself a little bit here. I hunted all over campus until I found our student treasurer, gathered 50 pennies, walked into his office, and dribbled the 50 pennies onto the desk in front of his face. That was the end of band. But I am forever grateful for what came next. The only course that had space to let me into the schedule at that point was California history. Miss Englehart was fresh out of her studies, and I'll make an aside here, this is how I get distracted. I couldn't remember her name. I had to go through a huge amount of research to figure out the teacher's name. And the library at my old high school was really helpful in that, so just, the things you have to do. Miss Englehart was fresh out of her studies and got me excited for history in a new way. It turned out that most of the students in the class were considered uninterested in school. I knew some of them from homeroom or other classes and liked them, but they were notorious for not doing homework. This teacher seemed to understand that and had us do projects and activities during class and in groups. I remember one project that had to do with California place names, but the one that changed my life was creating a trial for John C. Fremont regarding the massacre of Native Americans. How many of you know about John C. Fremont? A little bit. He was even more evil than I thought. As I was doing the research for my book, I read one part I had to read about John C. Fremont. He didn't make it into the book except for this part, but I was like, oh my God, he did all. You can read up on him. Anyway, Fremont's name was and is everywhere in California, but we had never been taught much about him. The occupation of Alcatraz, the war in Vietnam, the trial of the Chicago 7, and the rise of the Black Panthers were all current events. If my eyes were not open before, the trial of Fremont put a whole new spin on things. I'm not sure if the teacher asked me or if I volunteered because no one else would, but I took on the role of the accused. I had to read up on Fremont and the incident in California for which he was being tried and prepare a defense with my lawyer. I have little memory of what happened during the trial. The prosecutors were not brilliant. I do know that to this day, if I hear anyone waxing elegant about Fremont or defending a monument of him, I will call them on it. So that was early education in looking at colonization and some of the impacts. So I for some reason, I have tip number 3 at this point, probably because I'm talking about UNM. This was actually a tip that I got before I started doing my master's, but it really impacted me when I was at UNM. Tip number 3 is do at least one thing on your thesis or dissertation every day, every single day. And also, I also used that when I was working on this book because it's so easy to get distracted away. So whether it's just putting a citation into your references list or looking up a piece of information, whatever it is, just one thing. I think the secret is that if you sit down to do one thing, you'll probably do some more as well. So that tip is a very important one. This, my dissertation committee here was led by Joan Etzel. But one of the things, I was working on a project in Gallup that was right along the kind of thing I was doing, but I was interested still in the BC treaty process. And so I asked, what are you going to pick to do your dissertation on? And they said to me, where do you want to live after you're done here? And I said, BC. So they said, do the British Columbia project. So that is what I did. And that was a really good piece of advice because that was the deciding factor on getting hired to the University of the Fraser Valley, which is where I ended up for the last 15 years now, I guess. I mean, I'm retired, but I still taught a couple courses, so I'm just going to call it 15. And one of the people on my probationary committee was Dr. Schwaffel Hardman, Associate VP Quaquilmok. And so she started connecting with me at that time because she was on my probationary committee, and I don't know if she asked to be on the committee or if they asked her because of my dissertation topic, but I'm really glad they did. One of the things that we connected on and why I used this particular picture of her, I asked her if this was okay to use this picture because it's a very informal picture, but she lived in Golden as a child. And her family left right before the first year that I came. So our paths, she was just, she's that much younger than me. She was a child and I was a teenager, almost 20. And this tree that she's standing next to, every year, and they still do it, not as much as they did back then, but the forestry, like the people that grow trees for the tree planters, they give out seedlings at the elementary school. And this is a seedling that she planted in probably 1973 or 74. She planted this seedling, and that's the tree in the yard where she lived. So I like that association, that one. So we connected on that point. And then she started orienting me about, perfect timing, orienting me about Stalo territory and learning about the area, she was involved in a project that was across Canada and still is, called Indigenizing the University, making universities places where Indigenous people didn't need to deny their identity in order to be successful at university, is one way of saying it. And so she got me involved in that effort. And so one of the first things, stories, she's a storyteller too, and so stories are how we create, teach, and pass on culture. One of the ways that they have continually worked on that at UFB is to do place name tours. So you learn all of the places that are significant to the Stalo people. And I took this picture because that particular day it was kind of hazy, so it gave a perfect outline of this two mountains. So this is Litlake and Shwamai. And this is a woman who, you can see her pouty lips there. I can't tell you the whole story. You can actually look this particular story you can look up on YouTube. And this is her dog sitting behind her. And so one of the significances of Litlake is that she was the only one to ask to be turned into stone, so that she could look over the whole of Stalo territory. So if you go to the peak of Litlake, which actually is referred locally as Mount Shiam, which Shiam is actually only the bottom of the mountain, the misnaming of things, then from the peak, everything that you can see is Stalo territory. So place name tours was one of the ways that faculty get oriented. Sockeye salmon are really they're the most sacred animal for the Stalo people. She and I did a research project looking at, there was a commission, like what's called a Royal Commission in Canada, which is sponsored by the government, to look at the declines of the sockeye salmon in the Fraser River. And as part of that commission, anybody really could apply to come and speak to the commissioner. And so there were many Indigenous people that came. Some of them were asked to come, others said, I want to come and say things. And so what we did was we extracted from the transcripts of this whole commission, which were archived online. I think they're still archived online, and extracted. Well, actually, we didn't. We hired a student to extract the stories, so that we could then look at the stories, what those stories were trying to tell the commissioner, and that's the one that's published in Signs of Water. It's not easy to find because it's a chapter within a book, but if anybody's really interested, it's one of the most interesting pieces we did because the student did a really great job of getting all the stories for us. We figured out our sample and all that kind of thing. But then we got roadblocked. We couldn't figure out how to analyze them because as we started to analyze them, we're like, no, we're just answering the questions that the commission asked. We're not looking deeper into these stories. So we got stuck for a while. And but at one point I was rereading things, trying to get unstuck, and I reread Decolonizing Methodologies by Linda Toole-Weiss-Smith. Have any of you read that book at all? Good job. There's actually one to be raffled off, or I'm not sure how they're doing it, but donated by Chris. And so when I was rereading that, there's one of her chapters that she calls 25 Indigenous Projects. And I went, I wonder if we could use this as an analysis tool. So we did do that in the end, and it was very interesting. And it was really a cool process. And the article was really well received because it actually tells the stories as from the transcripts, right? So that's a cool one to read. So I learned a lot about stories about salmon, about the importance of the salmon, all of those kinds of things in that project. And one of the other things that I did that really impacted the work that I did there was to teach, but even more so learn from Indigenous cohorts of students at different times. And this is actually a cohort that just graduated as Halkmelem teachers. Halkmelem is the upriver dialect of Coast Salish. Not sure if that's the perfect description. But it was fun to tell. My friends would ask me, well, what are you doing right now? I said, I'm teaching in the Halkmelem program. They go, what? You know Halkmelem? And I'm like, no. I'm teaching them how to write proposals. But it was always fun. I have practiced a bit of Halkmelem, and they know like some of the basics, greetings and things like that. But no, I don't speak Halkmelem. But that was a really, really gratifying. This is their graduation ceremony with the drummers. I tell you these things just to show how my work at UNM pushed me into this job and gave me all these really rich experiences. And because I wanted to be immersed in those experiences, then I got asked more and more, and I learned more and more. COVID came along, and this was a silver lining for me in one way especially. I think a lot of people talked about there being silver linings. This particular one didn't seem so at first. My mom, she just turned 96. She was 91 at that time, I think. She fell, and she lived in California, and I lived in BC, and because we were teaching from home, I said, I'm on the road. I'm going to come down and live with you. So I lived with her for less than 6 months, because you got to be back in Canada, or you lose your medical, or have to reapply for your medical. So I had only that 6 months. But she needed to be moved into assisted living at that time, so I helped her do that. And she had an incredible stacks of archival material on family that I had no idea. She had boxes of letters that she and my dad wrote back and forth to each other when he was stationed away, and everything, some of the photographs, a lot of the photographs that are in this album over here that had somehow come into her possession over the years. She had saved all those in really good condition. And like one of the boxes of letters, she says, what am I going to do with these? Throw them out? And I said, no, I'll take them. So I stuffed everything in my car that I could. I had to actually sell my bike in order to do that, which I still kind of regret. That was a good bike, but it was very worth it. This is even before I wasn't thinking about writing a book at the time, but I had been doing some genealogy work. So So I took all those, and all of those archival materials that she had saved were absolutely extremely important in writing this book. So, documents and those kinds of things, not always easy to find. I got handed some really good stuff. So, oops, wrong one. Why write this book? I can't remember if I was going to tell another story. I don't think so. Not yet. Okay. When I was getting close to retirement, doing the paperwork, and my colleagues, 3 different colleagues asked me, what are you going to do when you retire? You going to write a book? I said, no, absolutely not. Why would I do that? I was not even in my thinking to do that, but after the 3rd person asked me, I thought, why are they asking me? Maybe there's a reason they're asking me. So I started thinking about that. Do I have a story to tell? And one of the things that in teaching intercultural communication, in talking about racism, inevitably, I would hear, and probably you have heard this too at some point in your lives, if not now as you're in your program, I never owned any slaves, I never killed any Indians, I never stole any land. What does this have to do with me? And I thought, as I would hear people say that, I began to think more and more, I'm thinking that maybe my family was implicated in all of those things. I didn't know a lot of the history, but I did know that my one great-grandfather was in an Oklahoma land run. I knew that much. I never associated with the fact that that had displaced Indigenous peoples, but I started to think about it. And I thought, you know what, I've been doing this genealogy work, I need to, but it was just sort of playing around with it. I wasn't really getting deep into it. And I thought, I wonder if I do this and make it about social injustice and social justice, my own path in thinking about those things, as well as looking at my actual family history and figuring out what of those things did we do, what are we implicated in, because we didn't get a lot of stories directly passed down, but now that I've done the work, I realize that there are things, like my siblings and I were always like, why is Mom the way she is? Now that I've done this research, I'm like, now I know why she is the way she is, because it came down through her family. You can see it in the history of her family. I go, oh, now it makes total sense. So those kinds of things. So I am going to read. What do I have here? I'm going to read a piece that is this. So I'm going to read this. This family is the Studeville family, which is my dad's maternal side of the family, and they have. It's a really interesting history. I'm not going to read you the beginning tale, but it's fascinating. This piece is 1786, Miami Territory, west of the Appalachians, Studevilles. Come in, dear Rosie. It's a pleasure to see you. Was your journey arduous? Amanda Studeville, heavy with her second child, smiles broadly and welcomes Rosanna Swank, the midwife, into the house. I have plucked a few of those plants you suggested, so I will brew us a bit. It seems our young Martin is happy to see you too. Rosanna gives Amanda a hug and swings 5-year-old Martin into her arms. A hot beverage would do just the trick. I have a few women and little ones to visit this day, but I am ready to relax and have a little visit to see how all goes with you and yours. I did not see Charles. horse outside," she continues. "I imagine he is off in the fields somewhere." "He was in the fields earlier," Amanda responds. "However, now he has gone to Elizabethtown to get supplies and send some correspondence back to England. We must, as always, pray for his safe return, as you know better than anyone, remembering, just in time, that Rosie still suffers from the loss of her own husband when he was able to draw an attack to himself while she escaped from a small party of Indians who used to be able to roam free in the verdant valley." I use the language that they would have used, and I say that in the beginning of the book. Amanda adds quickly, "He is always on the alert, and he has one of our blacks with him. We have not heard of any troubles with the tribes as of late, though he has been speaking with Captain Charles Hazelrig of late about joining in the battle against the Cherokee." She goes on, tells about how Charles got there. He indentured himself in order to come over, landed in Baltimore in 1774, and then they moved into what this area, which is now part of Kentucky, but at the time it wasn't called Kentucky. And his father was in the Royal Navy. So the reason I'm reading this particular one is because these were some decisions that I made about writing the book. One was that it's written in what's called historical narrative, which means all of the objects, people, things, happenings are all based on true fact, but the scene itself, I create the scene, and I made the decision to use the women to center all of the scenes, because I was amazed at they hear about how it's really hard to follow the women in historical record, but there's only one woman that I couldn't find a first name for. Often there would have their husband's last name, of course, but there was only one that I couldn't find. And some of them were just nicknames. Like there's one story that has 3 Pollys in it. They were probably all nicknames for a different name, but they were all in the same area, family, living together, neighbors. So I just made it the 3 Pollys. But this one, so for example, in this one, so it's Amanda. She talks, Rosie, the midwife. This is based on a actual journal written by Roseanne Swank, at the same period of time when they would have been in that same general area. So I just put the two of them together. I don't know if Rosanna Swank ever actually met Amanda, but it would be very likely. And so her journal, the journal that she wrote, includes this story of her being attacked and her husband drawing the attacking party away so that his wife and children could escape, which they did. So I included that in the story. I connect each story. So if you read through the book from all the pieces that just are Steubenville, you would see how they're connected. In this one, Martin is actually a direct ancestor. And so he's 5 years old, did I say, in this particular story. And the Elizabethtown reference it seems like a throwaway reference, but actually it's the same area at the same time that the Lincolns lived there, Thomas Lincoln, Abe Lincoln's family. And when they moved out of Kentucky, because there was so much problems with land title there, which is one of the very well documented things with the Lincolns, that's why they moved. And these guys moved at the same time to the same area into the Ohio Valley. And how many of you knew that Lincoln ran a ferry when he was a teenager, like 17 years old? Yes, I told you last week. So I have them meeting up on the ferry in the place where they went. So things like that, all the facts are actually true, but I put them into a scene that's not necessarily true. But I was saying this to a group of people that I knew really well. The one woman, she goes, "Or is it?" Right? She said, "They sound really true." So I tried to make them sound really true, but each story is connected. So that's an example of that. Where are we on the? So this next, I ended up normally I don't read from the same family. I read from a couple of different families, but today it just turned out that it was more convenient just to read from the Stugaville family. So this is the actual, this is one of the very first pieces I looked up even before I was trying to write this book, looking for information on the land run, when it was, where their homestead was, this and that, and it took a long time to find this. It was just on one of those, and this I probably found more than 10 years ago when I was just playing around with genealogy. So it was on one of those old kind of listservy kind of things. And but the link is still good. I did check the link, and you can still find that. But you can see it's just a text. It's just a text link. So this is actually my great grandfather there, and it gives the place where they lived at the time, where they registered when they registered to be in the land run. And I have this list here because after you finish your PhD, you won't necessarily think about these things. Oh, I have to do this, then I have to do that, then next I have to do this. It's so embedded in what you do. So when I was writing the book, I was doing all these things, but I wasn't thinking about them consciously. So when I was thinking about putting this together, I'm like, oh, I'm going to check myself and see if I did all these things. So I did have a research question, that one that I described. We're looking at my family and see how they're implicated in social injustices and the history as it moved. So, for example, in the LaFever part of my family, during the Civil War, they lived in Tennessee. There's still a lot of LaFevers in Tennessee, which was a seceded state, right? But they fought for the North. I never thought about it before. I kind of knew that, but I didn't think about, why would that be? But when I started to research it, they lived in what's considered Eastern Tennessee, and most of the people in Eastern Tennessee fought for the North. Don't know why. Nobody explained it, but they did. So looking at that in the scope of what the implications were of that. I actually have a picture of the LaFevers taken in 1887, but 3 people in the pictures actually fought in the Civil War for the North, so they're there. And in the back of the book, I list all of the regiments and companies and everything, which was some of the citations are not done in classic, writing your dissertation type citations, but I have a list of additional resources, major resources, and then I also have appendices, particularly of the military service, because the stories aren't about the men. It's from the women's point of view, so they mention the men are away fighting this, or they're doing that, or so-and-so got killed, or whatever. The women mention it in what they're doing, but the stories themselves are not about the men. So I have those listed. Do the stories resonate with other people's experiences, not just my own family, right? Will other people read them and go, oh, hey, yeah, I can see this, or I've heard of this kind of thing, or, oh, yeah, I get a lot of, yeah, there was something similar in my family, or that reminds me of a story when, right? So that resonance. The reliability of my facts, I discovered in using Ancestry. I don't know how many of you do genealogy stuff at all. No? Well, it's super popular these days. But there's a lot of really false information on ancestry. People play around with it and then they abandon it and they never like sort of double check the information they had. So that was the first thing I started doing, was going back to all the information I had and double checking it, verifying it, make sure that I had at least 2 or 3 things that said a particular thing was true. The method, using the women to tell the stories, telling it in historical narrative rather than fiction, historical fiction, deciding that I was going to use the women as the and also I had to very narrowly define just my direct line, because it's so easy to get sucked into a really cool story that's not really correct, and also people's names getting drawn down the wrong line of the family, which happened to me because the Virginia family, the colonial Virginia family, after the second generation, every generation had a Richard or two, like every one of the children named a child Richard, and then those Richards, went, a couple generations down. So it ended up that I was following a Richard that had a really cool history. I did actually leave him in the book because he got a land grant for 2,500 acres in what is now Kentucky, signed by Patrick Henry. So I'm like, I gotta leave that in there just for the Patrick Henry reference, but I have his wife writing to their cousins about it, right, which are the actual direct line of the family. And but I discovered when I got down to like the early 1900s that it wasn't the right Richard. So then I knew who the right Richard was, so I had to track him back again and see where I went wrong, because they both ended up in Iowa, but in totally different parts of Iowa, so that's what kind of threw me off. But I realized they were different branches of the same family, so I had to track back the other Richard and correct. I had to go back, remove a lot of stuff, and redo it. So, what else did I want to say about? My friend Dr. Cella Anne asked me to read this part, which is also related to the Studeville family. And this one I had to make a couple of footnotes for. Because in doing the research, I came across some information that in a medical journal I had about my great uncle, and I don't think that's true. So I had to check the information they had, wrote to the guy who wrote the article and said, this is an exaggeration at the very least. He wouldn't retract it, so I made sure that I put a footnote, because I did track down the information. What's the page number again? So this is it's about my great uncle, and his name is Orion, but the family says it Orion, which my cousin says that's because they have an Oklahoma accent, and that's how it comes out. So his mother is, the story starts with his mother scolding him, and then as she's trying to put the 3-month-old Lena May for her nap, and that's my grandmother, Lena May. So she's reminiscing during this time while she's trying to rock the baby to sleep. Marietta is pleased that Calvin has done well with the Cherokee Strip homestead and with entering into public life in this new state of Oklahoma. It was a bit of a shock when she had to deliver their son Orion in the back of a covered wagon when her husband was asked by the Indian agent from Anadarko Agency to escort Henry Romanos and his family back to their reservation near Okeen. It was not like old Henry did not know where he lived, but according to the U.S. government, he and any other Native Americans were not supposed to travel from the reservation without permission. It was quite the event when the baby was born, so Calvin asked the Southern Cheyenne elder to give him a name. So my footnote at that point says, the family telling of the story goes something like this. Henry Romanos, being one of the few from his community who had been sent to the white man's Carlisle school on his way from detainment in Florida to this new home in Oklahoma, pointed at the hunter in the clear night sky and said to use the white man's name for those stars. Romanos State Park is now a popular outing in the area. That's for footnote number 1. Footnote number 2 is in a later scene. I forgot to read the year and the territory name on that one, but it's Caddo territory. Sorry. Stop. I don't know how this. Okay, I'm just going to ignore it. Sound off. His family. I just hung up on them. All right. Oh, maybe I was only going to read the footnote. Okay, so the footnote here is Orion became a plastic surgeon who pioneered sex reassignment surgery. His C Journal article with co-researcher published in 1973, think of the URL. They also come across an article stating that his father was an Indian agent and that he was named by a Harvard-educated Native American elder. These are both false statements confirmed after checking with both the Anadarko Indian Agency, so I called. I couldn't get actually straight to the BIA archives because you have to have permission to do that and everything. So I went through the Historical Society and they had, they checked with the Anadarko Agency because they can see who was the Indian agent at any particular time. They're still the agency for that area. So they checked for me and said, no, he wasn't. However, they said that my great-grandfather was Justice of the Peace, and the Indian agents would often ask somebody like the Justice of the Peace to run an errand for them, basically. So we could make an assumption that that's what happened, but he was definitely not the Indian agent. And I also checked with Harvard University on whether that part was true, and no. All of their alumni records are really available for the public to see, and they do specifically have lists of Native American students who attended there. So I checked both of those, and they're not. So I put that footnote in there too, because when I tried to get the guy to correct it, he said, nah, we don't care. And so I'm like, this is my family, and this is false information. And, people are going to use it in years going down. So anyway, I could only make the correction in my book. So tip number 4 at this point, graduate study guides us onto what we are going to do in this world. And this is from a friend who heard it from somebody she knew. It's like laundry. It's never done. So this is what made me decide to write the book, because I thought, I've done all this study. I've done this graduate work. I've learned all of these things. I've lived in Stalo territory, done all of this. how do I continue that even though I'm retired from my job and I'm not teaching at a university anymore? And I thought this was the best way that I could do it, by really investigating my own privilege and my life, my ancestors' lives, and that impact. So there's many, many more really interesting things that I learned about my family and make interesting telling. I can easily get distracted into all kinds of stories. So that took me longer than I hoped to get through that, but I hope we have a few minutes for questions. I always get a lot of questions. So questions?
We actually have a gift from the department for you. Thank you so much. Yes. And so yeah, I think we can open it up, and I'll let Michael. Oh, you want to do a picture?
Yeah.
Oh, you want to do a picture together with our.
And with us.
Yes. Thank you.
I don't know why you're doing down so low. It's not a good angle.
That's okay.
Yeah.
In the meantime, we'll get through it.
And we get to approve it.
Yeah. And so maybe we have
And
time
I do
for.
have books.
Yes,
here.
the books are up here for sale. And then maybe we have time for just a couple
Yes,
questions.
so one question was, what was your favorite part of writing the book?
Actually doing the historical research, I really got into it. Like really looking up every little, I'd come across some detail and go, oh, this is interesting. Or I would look to see what was happening with women, like at the time things were going on. So there's one story that takes place in Tennessee where I have the women there just doing their work. They're potters there, and there's doing their pottery, but it happens to be at the same time, or I would pick a date that would match up with something that was happening. And in this case, Tennessee was having its centennial celebration, and they had a women's pavilion at the centennial celebration, and that I just came across like the pamphlet that they had produced at the time. And I thought, wow, this is a really cool thing that's happening at the same time. I'm going to match these women up with this. They're just talking about it. They don't go there, but they're talking about this thing that's going on for the centennial. So I loved looking for stuff like that.
Cool.
Before we do the next question, do you mind if I do the raffle now?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, we have 2 books that are going to be raffled. The book that was presented on today, and Linda Toy Smith's Colonizing Methodologies. So the 2 tickets that I pulled are $7.93.
Oh, that's me, sir.
He's already got the book.
Oh, yeah.
And he probably already has the Linda. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, David. By the way, Dr. Weiss is a former chair of our department, for those of you who have not met him, some of our new students. And then 787.
Somebody who left.
Probably something about 788. Okay. Of course, if you get the choice, so I don't know.
Actually, Marcella, can you go back to the first slide with the photo of you? I want to get a picture with.
Oh, I forgot. And
I take with you. I'd love to.
I also forgot to mention that this picture here that I used for the cover of the book was in my mom's archives. I did not have it, and I have nothing else from that period of time. I lost all my photographs from around that period of time. So the fact that she had it in her archives, and I was going through looking for, I wonder if this one will work. But you want me to go back to the very beginning?
Yeah, you with Calvin again.
Oh.
There we go. Yay.
785.
You want me to, is this what you're doing?
Got it. Thank you.
Yes. I didn't actually go through graduate.
What were the odds?
Thank you.
Any other last questions?
Yeah, someone else asked, was there points you wished you could rewrite history? For example, something to change the truth about it?
right now in history. I
Yeah.
would like to change the truth. Yeah, because actually as I was finishing up on the book and the current, I'm a dual citizen, U.S. and Canada, and so, there's a lot of talk that goes on in Canada. I don't know how many of you know the elbows up thing? No, I just thought, for some reason I thought all Americans knew elbows up by now, but that's the cry whenever anybody is talking about stuff that's going on in the U.S. right now that affects Canada. It's elbows up, so which is a hockey term for ready to fight. So anyway, to get back to your question, so yeah, in that I kept thinking, is my book timely? Or is it out of time? Like, is it not the right time? I didn't know a lot of them, like things that were personal to my family that were, when they're like, my dad was a guard at the Nuremberg trials. I didn't know that until just a few years ago. He kind of would mention things, but he'd never say it that way. I was guard at the Nuremberg trials, right? And so when my mom said something, I'm like, oh yeah. He would say stuff like, oh yeah, I had to guard that Hess guy. That didn't mean anything, right?
I was in Germany in the 60s, right?
So just, remembering and knowing those things and these things that as a nation, as a people, as immigrants, what people have gone through, and then to just be constantly bombarded with news that tells us that we're taking a huge step backward, but in daily life you don't necessarily see it, right? So so then I thought, yeah, it's as good a time as any to do this book, but yeah, and so I would say the current time.
Yeah. Thank you.
That answers the question.